Today we are going to create a clock animation in After Effects. As you've seen on my YouTube channel, if you've not, there is a video called Clock Animation. The clock animation video shows you the clock animating in and the sun rising, going down, and the moon rising and going down. Basically the passage of time. So we'll be creating that today. We'll be creating the clock because out of all of it in the video, the main focus of that whole video, the thing that stands out the most in that video is the clock. So here I have a 2-second composition, and if I play it, you can already tell it's pretty similar to the one that we you saw in that video. But I've changed it up a little bit. Made it a little bit more, basically a bit more simpler than the one you've seen on the video. You don't have shadow. We're just essentially focusing on the clock today. Now, if you're new to After Effects, I think this is a fantastic way of learning After Effects. After Effects is a very powerful program with some fantastic tools. And for anyone that's not used to using this program, I think it's a fantastic way of learning about layers, learning about shapes, learning about animating as well. It's a fantastic way. Now, before we begin creating our project, I want to make it clear that you can already tell that there's only a few layers here. There's only 3 layers here. If we click here, there's another layer which is in a pre-comp, and we'll get to that in a minute. We'll do why it is in a thing called a pre-comp. And as you can tell, there's 4 other layers. So essentially, basically, batches a bunch of layers into its own composition. So we'll talk about what a composition is in a second. So let's get started. To create a composition is pretty simple. You can click here, and just click create a new composition. And this is the composition settings. This is essentially setting up your project for the first time. And what we're going to call the comp name, we're going to just call it clock. And if your settings are different, then I would recommend following this guide here. Pause the video and just basically amend the settings that you have to this. So I have here how large is my or how big the frame is going to be. It's going to be essentially a 1920 by 1080, essentially a 1080 video. We are going to basically have a 30 frames per second basically video, and at the bottom I've essentially picked the duration of 2 seconds. Now you can already tell the difference because I essentially chose a different color. I've chosen this kind of mustardy yellow, and I will be picking this color instead. This is essentially just an example that we'll be following in this tutorial. So if this is the color you don't want, you want to choose a different color, go ahead. Choose red, choose green, maybe choose a sky blue. But I'm going to just go back to my original color that I was going to pick it originally, and it was going to be the mustardy yellow. And once you have all of this, just press OK. So congratulations, you've just basically now set up your composition for the first time. To create the face of the clock, it's pretty simple. Up here you have all of these icons, and here you have this rectangle tool. Now what we want to do is click and hold, and you can see there are different types of shapes, and we want to click on this one, the ellipse tool. Now I don't want you to just go and drag it in and do that. No. First of all, if all of this is basically different, what I want you to do is just choose white and stroke at 0. And if it's like, if your stroke is 0, just leave it as that. If your fill is a different color, then I would recommend just keeping it as white. Now, to put the shape in the frame, we don't want to do that because essentially it's not an even circle. What we need to do is we need to hold the shift button and drag, and then let go of both. Now we have a full circle. Now we've now placed this in our frame, but we want to keep it centered. We do. Now mine has the align tab here, but if yours doesn't have the align tab, just go to the top up here, which is not in frame. Click on window. So if you have window, just click on it and then click on align, and align will instantly pop up here. We now need to click on this one, which is align horizontally, and then click on this one called align vertically. Brilliant. The next thing we need to do is at the top up here, click on layer, and we need to go to transform and center anchor point in layer content. So we have the face of our clock, and we need to we need to rename the shape layer 1, because as we start building the project and start putting more layers in, it's going to get more confusing if we, I guess, have shape layer 1, shape layer 2, shape layer 3, shape layer 4, shape layer 4 or 5. It's going to get very confusing very quickly. So to do that, we need to rename our rename shape layer 1, and we're going to call this face. So go here, right click on shape layer 1 and click on rename. So let's change it to face. Brilliant. The next thing we need to do is we now need to create the edge. And that's pretty simple, that is. What we need to do is we need to click on the face. We need to hide it for a second. And I want you to press Command C and then V if you're Mac. Control C and then V on Windows. And as you can see, we now have 2 layers, the same, so identically the same. So let's have that in, let's show that. I want you to right click, rename and call it edge. We're now going to click on this arrow, click on contents, ellipse 1, and we are essentially going to delete fill 1. Let's delete it. So the fills disappeared now. We now need to go to the stroke 1, and you can see all of these, but it's essentially all of these different options. So if you see, if you just click on stroke 1, go to stroke width, and I'm going to just put a number down, and I'm going to put 10. There we go. We now have our edge added. Now remember, you can change this. You can have as 30. You can have it 20, but I'm just going to choose 10. Now if we now show the face, there we go. So we're starting to, as you can see, we're starting to create what you see. We're now on the second stage now. So let's now create the contents inside of our clock. We're now going to create the contents inside of our clock. So the first thing we should do is create the center, the thing that is going to hold our handles in our clock. Now, a great way I think of this is basically if we're going to hide this again, hide these two again, copy the face again, rename this one and call it center. We have this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you basically how to change the color. We can go over here and change the color here, we can, which is pretty simple. But another way of learning about After Effects is essentially all the tools are inside the layer, so all the tools here. So if I were to change the fill color, I can just go all the way here and change the fill color. So I'm going to choose black, and you're thinking, whoa, now my face has disappeared. Well, if we click on this arrow here, go to the transform, and we basically click on the scale option, we're now going to basically tell After Effects I want to make this shape smaller. So I'm going to scale it to 20, maybe 15. Now if we bring these two back in now, there we go. So we now have the face, we now have the edge, and we have now the round bit in the middle. We now need to create the handles, and then we need to create these dots around, which tells the time of 12 hours of the day. So let's create the handles. So we're getting really well, doing really well here. We are. We're now going to go to the shape, basically the shape tools here, and I'm going to choose Rand Rectangular Tool, or Rand Rectangle Tool, and I'm just going to basically start from here, and I'm going to drag all the way here. There we go. Now I'm going to make the fill black, and there we have it. We have essentially one of our handles we do. Now I'm going to make this the long handle. Remember to right click, rename it, so let's call this long. Now if you notice, what I've done is I've kept it really the names to about basically four letters to make it pretty simple for us. But you can name these whatever you want. So we have the long, and now we need the short. So let's copy and paste. Remember, it is basically Command C and then V, and then we have the same thing again. Now let's hide long, and now let's rename long to short. Now keep this highlighted, and we are now going to click on the selection tool, and we're now going to make this smaller, and I say about here. There we go. So here we have it. So we have the long and short handle, but you can't see the short handle. You can't see it. Well, don't worry. We're gonna sort that out right now. We are. if we click on the short layer, go to this arrow here, click on transform and click on rotate, you can now rotate it. So I'm going to do a 90 degree, and you can already tell, look at that, brilliant. So basically for the time being, we're just going to know that basically we have the two handles on the clock we do. We're now going to focus on adding the dots around our clock. As you can already see, we have the overall look of our clock, but it's the fine details that we need to add. We now need to add the 12 dots around our clock we do now. So remember, if our short handle was on 3 and the long handle was on 12, it's 3 o'clock. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add, we could add all 12 dots ourselves, and yeah, that's great, but it isn't accurate. It could be not completely accurate, and it could be one dot could be too much on that side and the other one could be on that side. There's a much more simpler way that we could do it in After Effects. So we're going to first of all, I'm going to make our long handle slightly smaller, and I'm now going to click on the ellipse tool, and I'm going to drag a small circle or ellipse basically onto our composition. And remember to hold shift and both at the same time let go, and we have our first dot. So remember to rename this and call it either tick or dot. I could call it dot because I've been talking, let's call it dot. I have. And what we're going to do is remember to align it horizontally, so we correctly have it centered of our clock we do. And we now, if you have it like this, the layer's completely closed, or you have it like this, remember to just click here and it will show up. So we're now going to basically display all the contents inside the layer, and we're now going to click on add, and now you get all of these different options, and we're going to click on repeater. So now we have repeater added to our contents. So we have 3 dots added. Okay, so as you can see, if we click on repeater, and actually expand all of the contents inside of this contents, but of repeater 1, we can already see 3. We need to have 12, so go all the way around our clock 12 times. So we are going to click on 3 and click on and actually type 12. But you're probably thinking, well, Jake, all of the dots are going out of the clock. They're not going all around the clock. Well, that's correct. That's where we need to tell After Effects that now we do. So we now need to click on the transform repeater 1, and we need to essentially tell After Effects the positioning, and we need to tell it how we essentially want to have our dots rotate, or basically go all the way around our clock. So first of all, we're going to put all of the 12 dots together. We'll click on position and click on 100 and just essentially type 0. So now all of them have been bundled into one. And now we're going to go to rotation, click on here, which has got the plus and the degrees. And we're now going to put 360 divided by 12. Let me show that. Let me show you that again. 360 divided by 12. Look at that. We now have our clock made. Pretty cool, right? So it is 3 o'clock. We are now going to focus our attention on animating the clock now. We've now designed the clock, but now we need to animate it to essentially replicate what we made in the example. So as you remember, the example that I showed at the beginning of the tutorial, we're essentially replicating it. But remember, as I said, if you want to change it up as it goes along and amend it to the way you want to, you can go ahead and do that while you're following on this tutorial. So the thing we need to focus on first is animating these handles, the short handle and the long handle. And to animate it, essentially, we want to tell After Effects to rotate these handles 360 degrees, but multiple times to kind of give that essentially that passage of time feel. So what we're going to do is, first off, as we did, we basically labeled and renamed all of our layers to essentially know what is the short handle, what is the long handle, what is the face of the clock. So what we need to do is first focus on the long handle. Now you can click here to click on the actual layer, or you can click down here on the layer names down here. So we're going to basically show all of its content. We are then going to click on transform. And we are now going to be displayed these settings here, these options here we have, and we've got like anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. What we need to focus our attention on is the rotation. Now, if I were to move the degrees to any position, as you can see, it starts moving. It does. But even if we move it, say like to 66 degrees, and we move it to the end of the timeline, it doesn't move, because we essentially haven't told After Effects to animate it. So we're going to do that now. Now here we have rotation, and we have all of our settings here for the rotation, but we have next to rotation, the name rotation, this stop clock, and this will allow us to essentially put in a keyframe. So if we want to essentially on the first keyframe at the beginning of our sequence, we want it to be at 0 degrees and that's it. But then we want it to then go to 90 degrees at the end of the sequence. We are going to essentially have to put another keyframe down at the end of the sequence. And that tells After Effects that we want it to move to that position we do. So let's put our first keyframe. Now just click on the stopwatch here, and you'll notice now that a diamond has been added to the sequence. That is essentially showing us that a keyframe has been added. We are basically going to move our time indicator right to the end. We can, and if for some reason you can't get to 2 seconds, just go up to the preview and click here and go to next keyframe. You may lose the image, but don't worry, it's not gone away. And now, while we still got the keyframe basically highlighted, we're now going to tell After Effects we want the long handle to go around our clock 3 times. Now remember, if you want to go faster or slower, now is your time to make that adjustment. But for myself, I'm going to do 3 times. And to do that, we're going to tell After Effects 3 times, and basically all the way around 360 degrees 3 times. We are. Now if we play it now, as you can see, 3 times that goes around now. So we've essentially animated our first handle, the long handle. We now need to animate the short handle. So remember, we've got our 2 keyframes here, and what we're going to do is basically do exactly the same with the short handle. So let's basically close all these options for the long handle, and now open the short handle. And if it's like this, remember, just going to go transform, click on it, and we are essentially showing all the options for transform of the short handle. Now remember, go to the beginning of the keyframe of the actual beginning of the time the sequence, and we're going to put in our first keyframe. Now remember to click on the stopwatch, and we can go right to the end. So here we are, right to the end, and we're going to tell the tell After Effects we want the basically the short handle to go a bit slower. We want it to, essentially, instead of it going 3 times around, we want it to do maybe once. So let's change the value to 1, and now we play it. We've now got our animated clock. We've essentially animated this this clock now to the way we want it to. So essentially, we have essentially done the complex part of animating our handles now. So that is completely done now. We have, and as you can see on our version, we've essentially done exactly the same as the example. So it's pretty cool, right? And I find it's really great because as you start to develop your skills in After Effects, you'll start learning keyframes more and start animating much more using basically these by essentially putting in these keyframes and telling After Effects how you want to animate it. So now we have animated our handles. So we have essentially the handles rotating around our clock. Really cool. But now there's other things we need to animate. We don't now. As shown in this clip here, basically in our example, as you can see, we have 2 other pieces of animation happening. We have the formation of the circle, which is the edge of the clock, and we have the appearance of the face of the clock basically coming in basically by zooming into the frame. We're going to focus on the formation of the edge of the clock first, so let's get started. So to start, we need to click on edge, which is the edge around our clock, as you can see. And we need to basically click here, we do on the arrow, and we have all like the contents and the transform there we do, and we need to click on add. Now, as before, remember all of these options are here, and we're going to go all the way down to trim paths. So now in our contents, we now have the ellipse one, and now we have trim paths one. So if we get all the options out for the trim paths one, as you can see, we've got start, end, offset, and trim multiple shapes. We're going to focus our attention on end, and we're not going to focus our attention on these like just end. We're going to be focused on today. Now remember to have time indicator at the start, and just to give you an idea of what trim paths does is, if I were to say I want 50% shown, 50% of the trim path shows, and as I increase it, as you can see, it starts to develop more of the circle. First none, and then when we get and increase it to 100%, we see the full circle. So first of all, let's put our percentage down to 0 and create our keyframe. Remember clicking on this stopwatch. And we're now going to put our time indicator, and we're going to basically go all the way down to, or all the way across to 1 second. We're going to basically click here to add a keyframe, but we're going to now put 100% here. So if we now play it, we now have the formation of the edge of the clock. Pretty cool. Now we are going to focus our attention on the face of the clock, zooming in. To do that, what we're going to do is we're going to do it slightly different to how the example is, because the example basically shows 3 layers: clock face, edge, and face. In this version, I'm basically going to have the face in it with all the other parts of the clock in its own pre-comp. So I'm going to show you that now. And a pre-comp basically puts all the layers together, it does, but it still is linked to our main composition is. So that's what essentially a pre-comp is. So what we're going to do is we're going to, if yours is basically labeled exactly the same, and if yours is on the fifth layer, which is egg, I want you to drag it right to the top. So egg is basically on the first layer, and then we're going to have from dot on layer 2 all the way to 6. We're going to highlight all of these layers. We are. And we're going to right click and click on pre-compose. We're going to pre-compose all of these we are into its own composition we are. So we're going to call this clock detail. So we've got clock detail as the new composition name, and what we're saying to After Effects, we're essentially saying move all attributes into new composition, essentially all of the layers basically that we want, all the options and that kind of stuff. So if we've animated our handles, we want those to be dragged over to our new composition we do, and we want to open up this composition we do. So as you can see, now we have 5 layers in clock detail, and in clock we now have our pre-comp here on layer 2, and in layer name and in layer 1 we have egg. So if I was to basically hide the egg, it has no effect on this pre-comp, which has got all of our basic clock face bundled in into its own composition. And what we're going to do now is we're going to open up the transform for the clock details we are. We're going to put our time indicator all the way to the first, basically to 0 frames we are. And we're going to click on the stopwatch. So we're going to add our first keyframe. And we're going to basically have it as 0%. So it's not in frame. And we're going to basically go to the first frame we are, 1 second in, and we're going to basically add a keyframe and have it as 100%. So now if we play it, pretty cool, right? Really cool. So we essentially have now created our animation for our clock. Now there's one more thing we want to do. We want to have the clock continually basically zooming in we do. To do that, we just essentially, all we're going to be doing is we're going to add another keyframe to 2 seconds we are on the clock detail, have it as 115, and on the egg, if we close this layer we do and open up egg layer, go to transform we are, and we are going to create a keyframe on 1 second we are, which is 100%, and we're going to go all the way to our second basically under 2 seconds we are, and we're going to have 115 for that too. So let's play it now. Pretty cool, right? Now there's one more thing we want to do, just to make it a bit more things, so you can see basically we can see the egg basically zooming in a little bit more. Well, why don't we add another keyframe at 0 seconds and put the scale possibly to 85%. So let's have a look. Look at that. So we have learned about keyframes, we've learned about trim, about trim paths, we've learned about pre-comps we have. So essentially, we have now created our animated clock. Fantastic. Now remember, you can use this as an example, you can, and adapt it to your own way and how you want your clock to be. You may want it to be for 4 seconds. Just use this tutorial as a way of as a guide, as a way to basically learn all the bits again if you get stuck. It's a really great way to learn the powerful tools that After Effects has to provide. I hope you've really enjoyed this tutorial. I've really enjoyed basically teaching this to you, and I hope basically to create more tutorials very soon. Thank you so much for watching, and happy animating.